So last time we introduced the example that looks at our choice of whether to go to school or to go to work. And in this, we began introducing our costs and benefits. So we said the cost to go to school is tuition, rent, and food. And in going to school, our benefit is going to be higher future earnings, potentially a more desirable job, and the college experience. Whereas work, the main costs are rent and food, but the benefit is going to be current wages. That is, you're making money today. So when we analyze this decision of do we go to school or work, and any decision really, and if we're thinking about it from an economic standpoint, um, we want to choose the option with the lowest opportunity cost or with the lower opportunity cost. So if we think about going to school, right, the opportunity cost of going to school, or I'll say opportunity cost of ... one going to school. This will be equal to what we face when we go to school. Now, when we look at our costs, one of the things we'll do is since rent and food, we have to buy them no matter what we do. When we're making our decision, we're not really going to worry about them because whether you're a student or you're a worker, you have to eat, you have to have somewhere to live. So rent and food, we're kind of just ignore. So when we look at this opportunity cost going to school, we're going to see that the cost that we have is tuition. But we also want to include, so we have our tuition plus what we give up from going to work. So this would be tuition plus our lost wages. Okay. So if you are a full-time traditional student, not only do you have to pay whatever tuition is, but you also are not working right now. None of y'all are driving for Uber at this very second or anything like that. Cool. Thanks, everybody. And here you go. So that's our opportunity cost going to school. On the second side, we want to look at what happens when we go to work. And we look on this one, we're going to see is there aren't really any direct costs to consider. That is, we don't have to pay tuition and rent and food. There's no cost that you wouldn't have to pay for if you were in school. Maybe you have to buy a uniform, but I could then go and say you have to buy clothes no matter what you do. It'd be considered inappropriate if you showed up at a workplace with no clothes. It would also be considered inappropriate to show up to school with no clothes. So that's kind of the thing about that. And it's getting into stuff that's extra, I guess. So when we think about work, we're going to look at our costs, which again is really nothing. But we're also going to look at what we give up. Right? So in this case of going to work, we don't have any outright costs, but we lose out on higher future earnings. Plus potentially a more desirable job. Plus that college experience. Again, with both those, we'll kind of talk through these in a second. So if I think about my higher future earnings, I can pretty well say if and suppose that you're considering going out to work or you're going for one particular field, right? You can look and see, well, if I'm going to go be an accountant, I know what an accountant can make. If I'm going to be, we'll start working at a high school, I know what I can make doing that. So between those two, we can very easily see what's my future earnings or what's the difference in future earnings from coming to school. But what we also have is that's a little more vague or wishy-washy, if we want to call it that, would be a more desirable job. Right, how much you value enjoying your work may depend on who you are. Some people have more of a it's work, I'm not supposed to enjoy it attitude. Some people really seek something that makes them happy. I'd encourage you to whatever you're majoring right now, be excited for what you're going for. Don't pick something that you're like not excited for, because you spend a lot of time at work, right? Especially if you're have a regular 9 to 5 job. So that more desirable job, right? How much am I going to enjoy my future job versus what do I have now? And do I have a way to put a value on that, right? And different people may have a different value on that depending on who they are. Then the college experience, that could be whatever we want it to be. It could be the opportunity to network. It could be the opportunity to have relatively low responsibility. Um, so if you think about let me not say what's acceptable, but if we think about what's going to get you fired from a job versus what's going to get you kicked out of college, especially a public college, it would be a lot easier for me to get fired than for any of you to get kicked out of school, right? If we do something super silly, right, that's its own thing. But if one of y'all came to class and were drunk or hungover, right, it doesn't look the best, but no one's going to kick you out of school. Probably no one's going to say anything or anything like that. However, if I did the same thing where I came into class and I was stumbling, and I know my voice is a little hoarse right now, but if I was actually like stumbling, not because maybe I'm almost recovering, or I'm in recovery, but you know what I mean, right? If I came in and I was, drunk or high or something like that, right? I'd probably get word back out, and I'd probably have a little talk about, hey, it's really not a good idea to show up to work in that condition, or you shouldn't show up to work inebriated, I guess would be the phrase we can say. So when you have that college experience, right, you have a little more flexibility. You can do what you want. If you miss, right, if you miss, you don't have to worry about sick leave or anything like that. You might have a max number of days you can miss, but they don't build or anything like that, so you don't have to worry about, so whereas when you're working, if you use a sick day, right, sick days can roll over, basically, in the working world, whereas in school, the number of days you're allowed to miss based off the professor, or maybe depending on the class, you're not going to be able to say, oh, well, I had perfect attendance last year in psychology, so I can, if say I had 5 classes that you can miss before I drop you, right? I don't have that, but say I did, right? You wouldn't be able to say, oh, I had perfect attendance last year in psychology, so I get to miss 10 classes here, right? We don't really do that. Whereas in work, if I don't use my sick days now, I get to use them next year. And same thing the year after that. Whatever I don't use, it rolls over, which kind of changes the game a little bit. But that college experience, again, whether it's the partying, whether it's networking, whether it's basketball, football games, whether it's just that opportunity to, if you want to stay up till 2 a.m. and go to a 7 a.m. class next day, more power to you. If you want to be able to sleep through something like after that, more power to you, right? Depending on the professor, they might be a little more, have a little more fun or a little less fun with you about it, but you have that experience, and different people can value that in different ways. So when we think about making this decision, so I'm just going to label these just for the sake of writing A and B. So if tuition plus lost wages, or the opportunity cost of school, is greater than this opportunity cost of going to work. Oops, I want that in red. I don't need that. Cool. So if our tuition plus our lost wages is greater than our higher future earnings plus our more desirable job plus the college experience, that is, the opportunity cost going to school is higher than going to work, then we are going to opt to go to work. Right? And on the other side, if the opportunity cost of going to school is less than that of going to work, then we are going to want to go to school. So if you have a career where you can go out right now, make a good living, and it's something you love to do, it'd be worth considering doing. But if you're in a situation where, say you want to teach or you want to go into something that requires a degree of some sort, you'd want to continue on in school, and so on. I do just point out, and I draw attention to this because there's more to life than money. When we look at this opportunity cost going to work, it's more than just these higher future earnings. You're also hopefully getting a job you desire more. Right? Hopefully, we're not coming in saying, "Oh yeah, I'm going to go study 2, 4, 6, 8 years, however long you're going to end up being in school, to do something you hate." Right? And so on. So that's our opportunity costs and how we can look at this decision. If they're equal, you can flip a coin, and that makes you decide what to work. But for the most part, we wouldn't see these. For the most part, we probably wouldn't see these being equal. It's probably going to be rather straightforward one way or the other, who you are, what you want to do, and so on. So we have that, and we can kind of move on. So we talked about looking at making our decisions. This is kind of looking in the future, right? And when we see these, I can kind of keep going with this. So when we say going to school, another thing we can say with going to school is staying in school, right? So suppose you come in, and I'm going to take jumps of degrees. So I'd start with associates and a bachelor's and a master's. Through this example, I'm not going to say, well, we go in and we complete, we go 1 year past our associates, we don't get our bachelor's or anything like that, right? Our steps are going to be different degrees or different programs. If we stay in school, we kind of have that same type of deal. So I think last time I mentioned something about something about long-term goals, right? And long-term goals are not bad. I'm not suggesting that. But what could become an issue is if I come in, I put my blinders on, and I just head straight towards that long-term goal without being aware or maybe even taking a peek time to time to see what other options are out there, right? There are things that have come up right, if you took high school me, I didn't know every career that was out there, right? Neither did my parents, because, well, funny story, which I'm not going to get into, but I was a first generation, so right, there was a lot of careers out there we didn't know about and stuff like that. So as we came in, originally I was going to be a high school math teacher, but then I'm like, oh, high school, right? So then I'm like, all right, I don't want to be in a high school. Found something else, and then kind of veered path once we got into school, but figured something else out along the way. So if we said when we look at staying in school, suppose I think I talked about like forensics, right? We come out of high school, we see the CSI in 24, I'm like, ooh, this is so cool, right? I'm gonna go get my doctorate in forensic science. But then we come into our first biology course, and we're like, oh, this is like really boring. Man, I'm not saying biology is boring. I'm saying maybe my standpoint. I come in, I say, this does not interest me at all, right? If I come in, I take my first class and it's not interesting, and then maybe you get into stuff and it's really just not interesting, right? You probably don't want to spend 8 years of your life pursuing something that is boring to you, right? That's what that's kind of saying if we look at that in terms of staying in school. So along the way, we can also look out, see what's available after your associate, see what's available after your bachelor's, and so on. But the other side of this that we want to do is we want to watch out for these sunk costs. And these are going to be costs that happened in the past and they can't be recovered. So 2 ways we can look at this. One, they are either incurred in the past or they're already committed, right? So if you were here last semester, you paid tuition last semester, right? You can't call the college and say, hey, I need my tuition back from last semester, right? They're going to tell you that's just not how it works, right? Same thing if I go to a auto shop, if I go in, get something done with my car, and then tomorrow something new comes up that's unrelated to what was fixed today, I can't go to the auto shop, say, yeah, yesterday you switched out my spark plugs, but today I had a tire go out, so I need the money for my spark plugs back, right? They're going to say no, right? That cost is already gone, and so on. So when we're thinking about how we deal with these sunk costs, we want to ignore them, right? And where am I? top of page 3. Right, costs incurred in the past. We want to ignore these costs. And the reason is when we're looking forward, they don't really play a role in what we have going on. Right, I have to look at, so if a tire goes out today, I'd say, all right, am I going to spend $200 more on a tire, or am I going to salvage my car? Right, we kind of have that choice of what I want to do with it. So that's the idea of our sunk costs. And what we don't like with sunk costs is they're frustrating. Right, so when we think about a car, right, if I put $500 in my car yesterday, and then today something else goes wrong with it, I don't want to, and suppose I have an older car, right? I'm not talking about a 2019 anything or 2020 car. This is an older car we're talking about. Something goes wrong yesterday, and then today something new comes up, right? It's frustrating because I just put this money into my car. I don't want to just send it to the salvage yard because it's too much to replace, especially since I put money into it yesterday. But even though it's frustrating, we really need to not focus on the past. So where this really gets us in trouble is casinos. So often people go in and they go up to a slot machine, pull a $100 bill, right? And at $100, it's a decent amount of money, but it's not. How do I put it? If you lose $100, odds are you can recover from it. It may be more or less difficult depending on your situation, but it's not. It's probably recoverable in the long run. So I go into a casino, I say, all right, I'm going to play $100 in a slot machine, yay me, right? So I go in, hit the button for about 20 minutes, then I'm out of money. But then I get this idea, well, I only need one good hit to make my money back. So then I go get one of my good friends, Benjamin Franklin, throw him in again, and then again play for about 20 minutes or so, and then I'm out of money again. All right, so now I'm down $200, which not good, right? I really don't want to just throw away $200 right now, but if I stop now, it's not going to ruin my life. But if I get just one good hit, I win my $200 back. So I keep going, right? Because I got to get that back. I've already put $200 in. I just need to keep going to get my money back, and so on. And I keep going, and I dig myself in this hole because of these sunk costs. And that's kind of where it can start to get us into trouble, right? We like to, and as a society, we like to focus on the past, but we kind of need to ignore it. And they say this lesson, ignore past errors. I wouldn't necessarily always call them errors. I would say ignore past choices. And the reason I say that, right, suppose you have an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, and right, you have that ex, right? And when you look back, you realize if I had married this person, it would have not been a good situation, right? Probably all aware of that kind of situation, right? Or maybe you get with, maybe after you break up with them, you meet someone new, and you're like, oh, this is how it's supposed to be, right? You kind of learn stuff. Even though it maybe would have been a mistake to marry that person in the past, it doesn't necessarily make that relationship a mistake, right? Because perhaps you learned something from it. Perhaps you learned something about you learned how to deal with stuff in that one. Maybe you learned stuff to look out for, whatever the case is. But in that case, right, when we think about it, and I use this as an example for this. We can learn from the past, and just because something happened in the past doesn't necessarily make it an error, right? So if I had to go get my spark plugs replaced today, does that make it, and if tomorrow something goes wrong, was it a mistake for me to do it today? Maybe not, right? And same thing so in my case, the girlfriend I had before my wife, was that a mistake? I don't think so, no. Right, we learned from it. And granted, it wasn't there was nothing about it that was super ugly, so there's that. But when I look on the past, it's not like, oh, well, I should have never even put myself in that situation, right? Because I learned from it. Because of that, I am a better husband today because of what I've learned in the past, right? So that's kind of what we can think of with the past. But again, we don't want to dwell on this stuff in the past, rather look at stuff in the future. Learn from your mistakes, but don't sit and say, oh, well, you know, this didn't work out, so hashtag forever alone, right? That kind of stuff. Right. So that's kind of how we can look at it in terms of an individual and what we have going on the individual side. On the other side, we have our production possibility frontier, which is right here. Unless you want, if you're a loner, there's no. I shouldn't have said that. If you're a loner, that's cool too, right? I don't mean that in a way of, oh well, if you never find someone, there's something wrong with you. No, it's right. Whatever makes you happy makes you happy. So don't take that as. Y'all know what I mean. I think. I hope. So on the other side, we look at things in terms of how society can make decisions. And what we're looking at here is what's called the production possibility frontier. And what this is going to look at is if we have a supply of resources, technology or whatever, what goods are we able to produce given these resources? And for this, we use the slope of this to find the opportunity cost. So one of the things that we're going to see with the production possibility frontier is it's going to have this bowed out shape. Right, that's what we see here in our example. We have healthcare and education. And when we think about healthcare, I'm going to think mostly of practitioners. Okay. So these are your doctors that you go if you wake up and you have the flu, this is the doctor you go see. These are your family doctors and so on. But then on the other side, when we think of education, I'm going to think of education for med school, basically. So these are your medical professors. Right. And I keep it that way just because of this. I like to break it down this way because if you don't want me in healthcare, right, I could not stick one of you with a needle, right? No matter how much training I had, if I went to school for it, I would not be comfortable sticking anybody with a needle. Not necessarily a needle, but with like an IV or anything like that. I would just not be comfortable with it. It's not anything I want to do, right? So for me, if I kind of wouldn't really be on this, even though I'm in education, you can't really call me and say, hey, go do a surgery tomorrow, right? Because again, bad things could happen and so on. But with this, we're going to notice is the shape of this curve, right? And at point A, what we're going to do is we say at this point, we have everyone is in, so we have 100% of people in practice and 0% in ed. And then down here, we have 100% in ed, but nobody in practice. Right. Well, notice about this curve. And we notice that it's bowed out instead of a straight line, right? The budget constraint was a straight line. If we think about a budget constraint, so this $20 bill has a 7 in the serial number. Nobody's gonna say if I take this $20 bill to the cafe, they're not gonna say, oh, it has a 7 in the serial number, so at restaurants or dining venues, this is worth half value because there's a 7 in the serial number. Right? Not really how it works or how money works. Instead, that's worth $20 wherever I go. Right? When we think about careers and our skill sets, it's not really that way, right? A person is not how do I put it? A person is not like just a person that I come in, like whereas a box of tissues, right? Every single one of these box of tissues has however many tissues are supposed to be in here, they're all exactly the same. As individuals, we have different skill sets, and this is what I mean when I say a person's not just a person. We have different skill sets, different abilities, different trade-offs, and so on. So if we think about classes, there are going to be some of y'all who this class might be super easy for, but another class may be very difficult. But while you're in that boat, maybe someone else in this class is having a really hard time, but the class that you think is difficult is super easy for them, right? So we have this trade-off, and we've probably seen that before among other people and so on. When we think about our healthcare and our education, I'm going to bring in two of the extremes. So suppose we start out in this case where everybody's teaching. And at some point, we probably had this professor or teacher who's brilliant. Right? They're smart. They know what they're talking about 100%. They're all the way up here even. But we're like more down here, right? With with what we can understand of the subject, right? I mean, and same thing with econ. If I came in and I brought in all of these multivariate calculus papers and stuff, right? We wouldn't get anything out of it just because we're not into the field as much and so on. So we have this professor, teacher, it's all the way up here. We're down here. But this professor can only bring it down to say here, right? They can bring it down a little bit, but not enough for anybody to be able to understand. So this person, while they're brilliant and they're great at practice, right? They're a great doctor. You can't understand what they're telling you, but they're great at what they do. So when they're in education, right, they're not really doing much for us, right? Because they're coming in, they're using these words that nobody understands. And if you're a beginning medical student, right, it's really not doing much for you. So if they were to switch from education into practice, well, we'd see this first doctor, we would lose relatively small amount of education, but we would have a huge gain in healthcare. But then on the other side, and when I say this, I don't mean anything against anyone with Parkinson's or anything like that. My high school principal had Parkinson's. I don't mean anything against these group of people. But if you came in, you're about to have heart surgery or brain surgery or whatever the case is, and if your doctor came in and couldn't keep their hand still, right, and they didn't have a steady hand, you might be a little nervous, right? And just because you're dealing with, one wrong cut and then you might be dead, right? That kind of stuff. So suppose we have this other doctor who is really good at explaining what they're doing, right? They can explain everything. They could explain heart surgery in a way where in our 55 minutes together, anybody here would be able to get out and do it, right? They're brilliant at explaining stuff and so on, but they don't have that steady hand, right? So they're coming in, they can explain stuff great, but again, that unsteady hand, when it comes to heart surgery, might make you a little nervous. So if we were in the case up here at point A, where everybody's practicing, if you had a doctor where the second they walk in, someone's like, hey, can I get a different doctor, please? Right? They're really not going to do much for the practice community. So in this case, if we have this doctor, we're going to see if they switch out. We're going to lose a relatively small amount in healthcare, but we're going to have a huge gain in education because they're really good at explaining stuff and they're good at teaching what to do. They just don't have that steady hand or whatever the case may be. Then in the middle, we'll have a group of people in the middle. So in grad school, one time I had an issue with if you have contacts, make sure you clean them like you're supposed to. Make sure you replace the contact cases and all that stuff like you're supposed to. Just trust me on it. It's a good choice. When they say to do it, it's worth it. But in grad school at University of Iowa, I had a little issue come up, a little infection or something in my eye, and it was gross, but oh well. So with it, I'm at University of Iowa, so logic says I go to the hospital right there, and they're not an optometrist, but the other side of the eyes. So an eye doctor, not the eye doctor at like that you get to test your eyes, but an eye doctor that actually works on issues with the eye, right? I can't think of what they're called. They're not optometrists. They're
more of like an eye surgeon.
Kinda, yeah. I think he could do surgery with on the eyes. But in there, I came in, had a doctor, and this doctor, he practices, and from what I've seen, he's very highly ranked in terms of some of the best doctors on the eyes. I think the school's like number 7 in the country, something like that. So this doctor is very highly ranked, but he also has maybe not apprentices, residents under him, right? So he has people that, hey, he's watching out for, keeping on seeing what they do. When he was doing my stuff, he had them look, then he checked over, make sure they said the right thing, but in that, this doctor in this case has this instance where he practices and runs from what my experience was a very good practice. But you also are teaching, right? You're mentoring, you're teaching. So in this case, you have more of an even trade-off of being able to practice and explain what's going on, or to be in education. So when we see this slope, part of what makes the slope what it is what's called diminishing marginal returns, or law of diminishing returns. There we go. And what this basically says is that as I more, so just like marginal utility, diminishing marginal utility, right? My 6th slice of pizza doesn't bring me as much joy as my 1st slice of pizza. As I move more and more to an extreme in terms of, this case, education or healthcare, or if we take any 2 resources and we move towards the extreme, we're going to see there's the marginal benefit from those additional increments will start to decline. So in this case, the last person we moved over, right? If we are, as we move from healthcare to education, once we get towards this extreme science of education, you're getting some people that can't teach, right? You're getting people who can't explain anything to save their lives. However, on the other side, if you move purely to the point where everybody's practicing, you're again going to get people who they're brilliant, they know what they're talking about, but they're just not that great at practice, right? And you have everywhere in between as well. So with that, any questions, comments, issues so far? Let me get a little organized. 3, 4, there's 5. So what this brings us into is different points, right? So we've seen these curves and so on. Let's get in here. So we kind of talked about this difference between budget constraint and the productive possibility frontier. The key thing, budget straight's a straight line, PPF is bowed out. Budget constraint deals with our income, whereas a PPF deals with the resources that are available to produce goods, and so on. We kind of talked about it, so I'm going to kind of get over it. So what I move into next is looking at efficiency, right? And we're going to see kind of 2 types of efficiency. The first is very broad definition. The second is very narrow, and there's going to be 1 point. So this first bit we have is called productive efficiency. And what this basically says is we're using all of our resources, or we're using all of our income. So a couple ways we can think about it. 1, we're using all of our resources. The second, which is kind of this definition, it's impossible to produce more of one good without cutting from the other good. Right, so if I have $100 and I'm spending $50 on, so I have $100 in my entertainment budget, I spend $50 on hockey tickets and $50 in movie tickets. In this case, if I want to buy more movie tickets, I have to take away from my hockey budget, right? And same thing the other way. If I want to move towards the other side, I have to do that as well. So when we think about this productive efficiency, we're going to have really 3 types of points. Oops, I want black for this. Okay. So we have, say, our 2 goods. What do we say? For this one, we have hockey and movies. And this would be for our entertainment budget, right? Then we have a straight line connecting the 2. So I kind of have 3 points I can have. One that is inside the budget constraint or the PPF, depending on the situation. Another that is on the curve, and a third that is outside. Then we'll label these as A. The second one is inside, that'll be B, and the third one's outside, will be C. So our first point, point A, is on the PPF or budget constraint. And we're going to say that this allocation is going to be considered efficient. So what this means is I'm using all of my budget towards what I'm supposed to be using it for, or I'm using all the resources I have available. So everyone in the classroom is working and doing something. The second point, B, is a point that is inside the PPF. And again, or the budget constraint. In this case, this really is a budget constraint. I kind of just got here and that's kind of what I drew. But this case, we would say it's inefficient. And it's because I'm not using all of my resources, right? So in this case, maybe in terms of PPF, I have everybody in the second row working, everyone in the third row is not. Or maybe I say, when I'm doing my budget, this is like strict budgeting. So my entertainment budget has to go towards entertainment. I can't save it or anything like that. So if I'm here at point B, say this is $25 on hockeys and movies, and I have $100 total. Right, in that case, I have 75, or that means I spent $50 total. That means I have basically $50 that's going to get thrown away at the end of the month, or has to go back to wherever my income is coming from, or whatever the case may be. In reality, right, you can say, well, I'm saving, and even if this is our entertainment budget, which when budgeting, buckets are nice, because you kind of get to see the fruits of your labor a little bit as you go, but you still get to save. Just my own little spin. But when we're here in a real world, yeah, I might say, all right, I can leave some leftover money in my budget so that I can go see Jeff Dunham and when he comes to town, or whatever the case is, or maybe there's something else I want to go see that costs more. But in the case of our models and stuff, we're going to call that inefficient because we're not using all of our resources. The third part is outside the PPF, or budget constraint, and this point is going to be considered unattainable. Right? And that's because I just can't afford it. I don't have the money for it. So if I have $100 to spend towards entertainment, I can't afford to pay $500 to go sit, right, for the backstage pass for some concert. Right? If I only have $100, I don't have $500. That's basically what that point C is telling us. So we have those three types of points that are looking at productive efficiency. Everything making sense so far? Oops, my bad. Cool. So the second type of efficiency that we're going to see is allocative. Now, when we look at allocative efficiency, we're going to take it a step further and say that we actually want a mix of goods that society wants. Right? So when we think about these, a couple notes with this. An allocative point, or an allocative efficient point, is productively efficient, but only one productively efficient point is allocatively efficient. So what that means, and that can probably be those two dots underneath allocative efficiency. But what that means, if we think about our education and our healthcare, right? So we have health and education, right? And we have our PPF that looks something like that. Everything on the PPF, so everything that I'm drawing in red, is going to be productively efficient. But when we think about what's allocatively efficient, we're going to run into some issues. So if we had every doctor or everybody who knows anything about medical care practicing, whenever they retire, they die, there's going to be nobody to kind of carry that on, right? Because somebody has to teach the next generation, somebody has to do that, and if nobody's teaching, nobody figures out how to do. So we don't want to be at this point where we have everyone towards healthcare, but also if every doctor was teaching the next generation of doctors, it also wouldn't be very good, right? Because then there'd be, when you're sick, you wouldn't have anybody to go see. They'd say, oh yeah, well, I'm teaching, so I can't help you. Right, so probably these two extremes aren't going to be really what's socially desirable. Instead, we're probably going to be somewhere, probably somewhere in the middle. In this example, whatever. Oh, cool. In this example, right, so we have our PPF, we have our productively efficient point. This example, I guess, would be somewhere more on the healthcare side, just because one doctor can train like 30 new doctors at a time, or whatever the ratio would be. But in this case, we'd be somewhere in the middle. That way we have people who are educating the next generation, but we also have people that are working in healthcare. If I need to go see a doctor, I'm able to. And right, we like to have that nice balance. And same thing with any types of goods. So with allocative efficiency, suppose I had a factory that can make 100 shoes a day. If they came in and made 100 left shoes every day, right, they'd be working at what they're able to produce, but society probably wouldn't really desire that too much, because an overwhelming majority, a very overwhelming majority of people have a left and right foot, right? I mean, I imagine there's some people who have probably 2 left or 2 right feet, but it's probably a very, very rare condition, right? So for the most part, in that case, again, we have like left shoes, right shoes. We'd want to be somewhere around 50-50. And if you did want to account for, people who had the maybe 2 left or 2 right foot, we'd probably say there's an equal number for the same. So still, society would want 50-50. And even in real world, not real world, but in our day-to-day lives, think about hot dogs and hot dog buns. For whatever reason, we have packages of 6 hot dogs and 8 buns, right? We have stuff like that. We consider it to be, we often think, well, that's not efficient. In that case, maybe it's productively, but we can question whether it's allocatively efficient. So that's productive and allocative. On this chart coming up, it asks which points have productive. So our productive efficiency in this case is going to be, again, every point on the PPF. So in this case, that's A, B, C, D, and F. And then the other one, which is right here at point R, we have R, and in this case, it's inside the PPF. So it is considered to be inefficient. So again, just kind of looking at how that works. So next little bit, and we might dive into this a little deeper down the road. But next little bit look at talks about this idea of comparative advantage. And what this says is that a country can produce a good at a lower opportunity cost than another. So the example that we have looks at Brazil, or the 2 little charts you have, and they may be hard to read, but we have Brazil and the US. And with Brazil, we have them producing sugar on the y-axis and wheat on the x-axis. And we can come in and we have that Brazil produces a lot of sugar, but not a lot of wheat, while the US produces little sugar, but a lot of wheat. If we think about the validity of this, probably holds true. Sugar tends to grow well in a tropical environment, more in the south, but even in the south, doesn't do that great in temperate environments. Whereas wheat does well, it does pretty well around here, kind of like corn does. So if we think about the opportunity cost to produce each good, so if we're looking for our comparative advantage, we'd want to see, well, who has the lower opportunity cost for each good. So for sugar, we're going to see that for Brazil, if they want to make, I'm going to start a little bit lower, that way it's a little more obvious on what's going on. So for Brazil, if they were in a spot where we're both making a lot of wheat, if Brazil were to make 1 unit of sugar, they'd have to give up a relatively small amount of wheat. I understand that may be hard to see. Sorry about that. But I'm starting to on the wheat side and figuring that out. The same thing for the US. If we make 1 more unit of sugar, you're going to see that while they give up just this little bit of wheat, we give up this large amount of wheat. So since Brazil gives up a small amount of wheat to make 1 unit of sugar, they have the comparative advantage in sugar. Then on the other side for the wheat, if I started up here, say, if we had that Brazil made 1 unit of wheat, we're going to see that they give up a large amount of sugar, whereas the US makes 1 unit of wheat, they give up hardly any sugar. So wheat would go to the US. And the interpretation of this would be that the US would export wheat and Brazil would export sugar. That's the basic idea of comparative advantage. If you're bored, if you look at the Tuesday, Thursday section of this, we kind of get a little more in depth on it. We're just in a little bit of a different spot than they are. They had a full week because we didn't cancel on Tuesday or Thursday, whereas we had Monday off. But if you look at that and you look through that, you have any questions, feel free, let me know. Or on Monday, if you want to dive more into it, we can. So the next little bit, and this also goes in depth as well. I like to write stuff out because I feel like it puts us more together. I don't know. So the next little bit we have this question: is economics perfect? Right. This is one of the cool things about one of the reasons that even if this book wasn't available for no cost, one of the things I like about our textbook is that it kind of says, hey, this is where our models maybe fall short. This is where stuff, or maybe when we talk about this rational person, maybe we don't actually want to be this rational person. And we'll see a couple instances why here. So the first question we have is, do people act the way they should, or with this perfectly rational economic thought? And the answer is no, they don't. Right? We dwell on the past. We focus on the past. We don't always sit and say, well, right, what's the rational decision, right? Sometimes we get, I think the big word that would really encompass what I'm getting at is we can be prideful, right? That is, we're going to say, hey, this is my thought, and I'm going to make this thought work because I came up with it and I like my thought. So it's going to work, even if it's not the best. Sometimes, and we're all probably guilty of it, I know I am big time, we'll come through and we're going to say, all right, this is going to work because I like this thought and this sounds good in my head, so it's going to work. Even if it doesn't, we still push through and kind of like to put those blinders on. So we don't always act the way we should. However, it is fair to analyze based off of this rational way of thinking, largely because of this. So in statistics, there's a thing called the law of large numbers. Okay. So if someone had on a Bass Pro sweater, right? Yeah. So I could assume, right? So I could say, oh yeah, you must be into fishing and hunting. Yay or nay?
Fishing, yes.
Okay. So we could say, hey, I could make an assumption because of the Bass Pro sweater that you're into both of them, right? And you could say, yeah, that makes sense, right? Why would you wear a Bass Pro? But someone else might come in and say, well, I'm not into either. I just like the way the sweater works. It's a comfy sweater, and maybe they had it on Black Friday sale for, a low price, right? So maybe someone just likes it. However, if I had a room of 100 people wearing that same Bass Pro sweater, there's probably a decent chance that a lot of them would be into fishing and hunting or outdoors type activities, right? Same thing with anything. And what we see with statistics, and with statistics, the idea of, stereotyping, if we want to call it that, it would be hard for me to come through and say, oh, well, right, you're wearing that Bass Pro Shop, so you must be a hunter, right? That wouldn't really be fair for me to say, right? Just because I'm pointing out as an individual saying that's what you are because you're wearing this Bass Pro. However, if I had a bunch of people wearing them, odds are some of them would be. And that's kind of what statistics looks at. Based on what I'm getting with that, statistics doesn't give us free way to make assumptions about people. It just helps us with large groups of people be able to predict how a lot would act. But so on an individual level, right, we might say, hey, there's a decent chance an individual would or would not be into hunting and fishing. However, if we analyze the market of everybody who wore Bass Pro sweaters, there's a decent chance that a good portion of them would be involved in that kind of stuff, because why else would you go to Bass Pro Shop, right? So that's kind of what we see. People don't always act the way, but it's still reasonable to try to explain stuff in the way. The second little bit question we have is, should people act this way? Again, the answer is probably not. So we think about this economic mindset, and what if I acted as a perfect economic agent? Suppose you and I are applying for a job, and this job takes scores. So they take scores of everything, and I know that you have me beat by 2 points on this job, right? So you're going to get the job. I'm going to be just a little bit behind you, but I'm still hireable and still be great at the job. It would be a shame if the person that was like 2 points ahead of me like went missing or something like that, right? Which, if we think of it as a pure, and assuming I knew how to do that crime with getting away with it, without getting caught and all that good stuff. In the short run, it's like, well, if you just went missing, I get the job of my dreams, right? So if we think about our economic mindset, it could lead us, meaning when we look at it a pure economic in terms of one day, it could lead us to do some very silly things. However, and with this, the economic approach kind of pictures us as being very self-interested. So I look out for myself, don't really care about anyone else. We're going to see is this, what we will see is that we are not a form of moral instruction. All right, so I'm not coming in telling you how to live your life and so on. The two types of statements we have, I'm going to kind of get through because we're short on time. We have these positive statements, which are going to be factually based. So if I said it's snowing outside, that is something factual. Or even if I said it's sunny outside, it's factually based. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm telling you as the world is. The other type of statement we have is a normative statement. And this is one that is largely opinion based. So if I said it's snowing outside, so you should drive double the speed limit, right? That's a matter of my opinion on how you should handle the snow. Don't drive double the speed limit when it's snowy, but you get the point. So upcoming, we have elections, caucuses in a week and a couple days. In a few months, we have an election. Between now and then, we're going to have all these candidates come through, both Republican and Democrat. Republicans will come through, say, hey, I have all these numbers that make everything look good. Because everything's good, you should vote for me. Democrats are going to come through and say, yeah, they have those numbers, but in reality, things are bad. They've never been worse than they are now. So because things are bad, you should put my party in power, right? And in 2016, that was flipped, right? 2016, Republicans were saying, oh, look what the Democrats have done over the past 8 years. You need to get us in power. And the Democrats were saying, look at how much good we've done, and so on. So that's our positive and normative statements. We'll see them. Then the last phrase you have is the invisible hand. I'll open up the quiz and then kind of chat about it for a second. On the quiz, you don't need to make like a 5-page essay. Just what you need to get the point across. But with invisible hand, what this says is that even if I'm looking out for my own self-interest, I will oftentimes end up having positive social outcomes. So we think about class, right? It would make my job easier if we just came in every day and watched cat videos, right? That'd be like super easy, no prep or anything like that. But if I did that, and even if we didn't go and like tell administration on me or anything, you would tell your friends, right? Because you're like, hey, you got to take econ. You just sit and watch cat videos all the time, right? So then they come in and word gets around. Eventually, it would get around to Drew or to someone like that. And I'd have to have a talk about how it's not acceptable to sit and watch cat videos all day during an economics course, right? So even though in the short term, it may seem, yeah, my self-interest is to do easy or to do shoddy work, as I might call it. If we actually think about the long term, my self-interest is to actually run a good class. That way, one, makes you all happy, says, hey, maybe you'll tell someone to come take this class, and it makes administration happy, and it actually makes me happy when I have a good class. So we have this invisible hand. This leads businesses to produce goods that are needed by society. And it's even possible, which we'll see next chapter, that there are potential selfish actions that could lead to a broader social good. The example we're going to get into that could be kind of counterintuitive or could raise some eyebrows is price gouging laws. Cool. So with that, any questions, comments, issues? Cool. Make sure you do the quiz on Go Soapbox. It'll be, actually, if you could do it like quick, it would help me out because we have our drops due at midnight. So yeah, be